session.
So briefly, tell me, you say 14 bills and those types of things. Not being there, I don't have a good handle, and I think many of us don't, on what that means. So writing a bill and getting it through, just real briefly, how much of a process is that?
Well, what I don't do is I don't go to the bill drafting department and say, I got an idea, figure out how to make this work. I do that research myself, and I look at other legislation from around the country. I might be spending time in the law library, I might be reading court cases to try to understand the issue. I might be reading technical reports, and on that body scanner bill, I could do that with my background in engineering. But I try to understand the issue and I try to resolve it. And really, what happened on that body scanner bill is it came down to jurisdiction, and what I finally realized was the state has jurisdiction in a lot of areas where these body scanners could be used, and we can certainly weigh in on that. And I think we even have jurisdiction at the airports too, although this summer when I get some time, I've got some things I need to research there, and I plan on bringing that bill back next session.
Great. Let's talk about the silver bill that you recently proposed or had through. Tell me about that.
Well, I'm proposing this silver bill because we've got the silver capital of the world here in Idaho, in the Silver Valley. And I'm told by some mining executives up there that my bill could create 400 to 800 mining jobs. And the spin-off effect of that would be to create about 1,000 to 2,000 jobs within the North Idaho area. And also one of my concerns is what's going on in the banking industry and what's going on with the Federal Reserve System. We don't know how much money the Federal Reserve is creating, but we suspect it's in the tens of trillions of dollars, which is really out of control. But they don't report everything they do anymore. They cut back on their reporting a few years ago. So I'm worried we're going to be in for a huge amount of inflation here in the future. And I would like to see Idahoans have some alternative place to put their money other than the Federal Reserve notes, which are going to be worthless here pretty soon. So what my bill does is it would take silver out of the ground from Idaho, mint it into a medallion here in Idaho, and we're sort of blessed to have the Sunshine Mint in North Idaho. They're going to have to compete for this contract, but nonetheless, they mint all the silver blanks for the United States Mint to the tune of about 20 million blanks a year. But anyways, we would mint it into a medallion in Idaho, and it would be sold to the public by way of the Idaho Treasurer's Office, and the Treasurer would accept those back for payment of taxes. And so we might be able to get this silver circulating in the Idaho economy with this program.
Great. And where does the bill stand right now?
Well, we got the bill out of the House, and I think the vote was about 55 to 14 or something in that area. It went over to the Senate Local Government Taxation Committee where it failed in committee. But I plan on bringing that back next year.
Great. And how does that bill protect Idahoans?
Well, one thing it would do was bring some of our jobs back from overseas. And right now, we really can't do what I described in the bill, what the bill's goal is, because right now, when the silver ore comes out of the ground in Idaho, it goes to Belgium, Finland, Canada, Mexico, China, and Korea to be processed. None of that silver ore is processed in the United States. So my bill includes a tax incentive, just a tax holiday, for a company that would come into Idaho and build a processing facility using some newer technologies that are environmentally clean. And so that we could keep that ore in Idaho, we could process the silver here, bring those jobs back from overseas, and lower our cost of production to produce silver in Idaho.
And what was the opposition to the bill?
I think people were just unfamiliar with it.
Okay. Well, let's talk about some of the things that have gone on while you've been a legislator, and some of the things that have happened this summer that I think can be very confusing and people want to know. You have a very strong position on taxes. So why don't you kind of tell us what that position is and the beginning of this story?
Well, there's a whole body of literature out there that makes the point that the income tax has grown far beyond what it was originally intended to be, to the point where some parts of it are unconstitutional. I believe most of it is constitutional, but that it has grown beyond its original limitations that are to be on it based on the Constitution, the original intent of the income tax, and what Congress was actually trying to do with the income tax amendment to the Constitution. So I got interested in that subject, and I even dove in, you might say, head first with probably not quite enough preparation. And what I did is I sued the IRS to get a refund for taxes that I had already paid. And that litigation took 7 years. And in that 7-year process, I went to tax court. It took the tax court 17 months to rule on my case. And they said I was frivolous, but if I'm frivolous, why take the 17 months? I mean, if it's frivolous on its face. But nonetheless, it took 17 months to rule, and I appealed to the Ninth Circuit and then finally to the Supreme Court of the United States. And that whole process took about 7 years, and when it was done and the Supreme Court did not hear my case, so they did not actually rule on my case, I began to file returns and start paying some of the back taxes. And so I'm not sure you could say I refused to pay, but what I did was I questioned the system and litigated my objections to it.
And your position on taxes and revenue, during that process of you formulating that, all your research, you wrote a book.
I did write a book about the issue, and what happened was, realizing that I was in for a fight with the tax collecting authority, which I don't recommend people take on, actually. I should wear a sign that says, "Don't try this experiment at home." But nonetheless, I got very interested in the issue. I realized I had a fight on my hands. I started reading everything I get my hands on, and I found myself a little bit unhappy with the quality of the literature. So I thought I would do some research myself, and I went back east and read the congressional record at the Library of Congress and looked into the transcript of record of some of the early United States Supreme Court cases on the income tax issue. I went through law journal articles, newspaper articles. I read 300 articles out of the New York Times, which is a newspaper record, and they catalog all their articles in yearbooks. And basically, I looked everywhere you could imagine, to the point where my research was exhaustive. There isn't really much out there that I haven't seen. And when I realized that I had run across some information that wasn't in the literature, for example, some of the transcript of records from the United States Supreme Court, you can only get those in one of two locations, either the United States Supreme Court Law Library or the Library of Congress. Now, some of them are around in supposedly depository libraries around the United States, but that's kind of a hit or miss proposition. But nonetheless, I pulled out some of those books out of the Library of Congress, and when I opened them up, I was the first person to open them, the only person that ever opened them, and I know because they started falling apart when I had opened the books because no one had ever touched them before. So I really brought new issues, new evidence into my court case that I litigated, and I should have gotten a better hearing from the court system, and basically, really, they just brushed me off and didn't even consider my argument.
So the picture painted of the Idaho guy not wanting to pay taxes, that's not what it is.
No, that's not what it is at all. I did exhaustive research. I can say that there's no evidence out there that rebuts my position, because through my exhaustive research, had there been that evidence, I would have found it. And I would have probably drawn a different conclusion. But nonetheless, I analyzed the evidence with kind of the same degree of professionalism that I approach my engineering work. And I have had about a year training in law school, and I have taken a course in legal research, and the process I followed was the process that any legal researcher would have followed to examine the issue that I examined. And realizing that I had so much information that wasn't in the literature, I wrote a book about it. And I hadn't planned on writing a book, but I thought, I got to tell the story. I got to let other people know what I discovered. And that's the reason I put that book out for the public to have a look at.